Bonjour, and welcome to all of you comic book geeks, readers, and collectors to part 4 of my personal memoirs. It's just a very, very specifically personal journey through the ages. Well, especially for you younger viewers, it is definitely back in time. Because I started collecting in the 70s, but this is part 4. So now, after my little scroll, we are going to look at how the rise of the independent comic publishers, first Eclipse, etc., and how the rise in that and the direct market. And the direct market meant the explosion of comic shops, not just in England, because obviously I'm English, so I'm very specifically, it's going to be my personal journey, so I can only talk about England, but widely in the 80s there was a massive explosion of attention on the comic book arena, thanks to 2 books that we're going to look at from 1986. See if you can guess them already without fast forwarding. You know what they are. But the lead up to that was kind of like the peak of a more adult approach, but also of an explosion in popularity. There were a lot of people getting into comics, so you would have shops dedicated to that audience, not just collectors, but I think you end up being a collector as such, even if you're into books and you might like first editions of certain authors or etc. So you get where I'm going with that. That's only my perception. This isn't a documentary on the mid 80s comic explosion. This is just my opinion. And I know just from my personal experience, the amount of specialist shops that were popping up where you could go and get your back issues and you could get your monthly fix of American comics. But the direct market, these were comics specifically aimed at that audience. Now think about it. I mean, the comics market now is only that, really. The US floppies, it is only that. You don't see them in. I know America is slightly different. I think you get packs in Target, don't you, something like that. Let me know in the comments, because like I say, I can't speak for America, but broadly speaking, comics has come as really now is a niche publishing exercise, even more niche than these companies doing direct market. So what I mean by direct market is that they're printed but on a better quality paper, possibly creator owned. We'll have a look at them. No adverts. So no adverts, better quality paper, 9 times out of 10 creator owned, but it costs a bit more because of those reasons. You've got no advertising paying, something's got to give. So, but what it did give us, like I say, is a massive explosion of imagination, creativity, and excellent. It was an excellent time to be around because everything was new. Specialty shops were new. Comic conventions in the UK were new and growing. It was great. Get your book signed, and it was pre-eBay, and so you could literally take a little stack of comics like I did, and I will show you Alan Moore doing a signing for a specific for a specific thing. He's at a convention, but you could have took him an issue of Swamp Thing, an issue of 2000 AD. You weren't bothered about getting a selfie with him so you could give it some validation on eBay and say, look, this is how No, it was just your favourite creators vandalising your favourite comics, and I've still got them. Well, most of them anyway. So if you like the sound of that, the taste of that, the thrill of that, please join me after my scroll. We will look at the explosion of independence, the rise of the direct market. We're going to have a look at the two big hitters in the mid-80s. Yeah, you know what they are. And we are going to have a look at the one thing that did rock my world in the mid-80s, and that is Epic Comics from Marvel. Probably one of the best things they've ever done. In those, you know, as a what would you call it? As an imprint. A bit like DC with Vertigo, but we're a bit too early for that. Vertigo is going to be in another episode, and that's going to be equally as, for me, growing up, as equally as mind-blowing. Because now, mid-80s, I've not only got my paper round, I've got another part-time job at Tesco's. I've got some money. Oh, have I got some dough? Have I got some dough to spend on /waste if you listen to my dad back in the day? So if it wasn't film posters and magazines, music magazines and music, it was comics. So anyway, please join me after the scroll if you like the sound of all that. Welcome. So briefly, before we get going on all of the rise of the imprints and stuff and direct market, Marvel in the 80s. I can't speak for DC. Let me get one thing out of the way right now, if you haven't been here before. It was Marvel for me. Not exclusively. I was just somehow Frank Miller on Daredevil, John Byrne on Fantastic Four and X-Men, and sometimes Captain America. He'd done a little run in the 80s. You know, he seemed to be everywhere. And do you know what? I did follow Byrne over to DC when he done Superman. But anyway, all of these titles they seem to have creative teams that we miss now. I miss the cohesiveness of the same creative team staying on one book. I miss that because I don't think you can, month after month, you don't get that in books. You don't get that anywhere else. You might get it in TV, episodic TV. But that's the best thing about comics, when you've got the same team, especially even if it's the same writer, but the artists change maybe every arc. But I know that, you know, Marvel now can't even stick to that. But back in those days, they could. They had, like I say, Miller. You had John Simonson on Thor. You had on Iron Man. You had John Romita Jr. as he was starting out. Roger Stern was doing a lot of writing consistently across Avengers. He was noticed. David Michelin on Iron Man. Anyway, but in the late 70s, 1980, this comic I bought consistently. This is the actual issue of what I would have picked up. I think it was December 79. I don't know what it was about this comic I had to have every month. And it wasn't the same art team on it every month, but Bill Mantlo, pretty sure it's Bill Mantlo. Anyway, I love this comic, and do you know what, I still do, and I think it stood the test of time. But Marvel was solid. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. Marvel were absolutely rock solid in the 80s. You can say a lot against Marvel, really, but I think it was the late 80s leading into the 90s that they kind of waned. But I think everyone did. But anyway, we're going to get to that in another chapter. This, like Camelot 3000 from DC, like I say, direct market, aimed at the specialist shops. They're forgetting about the news agents. They're saying, no, we don't want the comics code. Don't worry about that. And Marvel, you know, not that they had ever, or DC, every now and again they had done different titles that didn't have the comics code authority. So you can't, the news agents just go, nah. Actually, I don't know how it affected things at the news agents. Anyway, they didn't go through the comics code or authority. And glossy stock. Dave Cockrum on X-Men. No adverts. No advert. Oh, there's loads of words. You know it's Claremont. Oh, yeah, it is. You know it's Claremont when you get words. Look, words. Good up, but anyway, I'm joshing, by the way. If you haven't been here before, I'm only joking. Got my tongue firmly in my cheek. So anyway, Marvel were rock solid, but I don't know what led me to Swamp Thing. That's another joke. You all know what led me to Swamp Thing. It was Alan Moore taking over the writing reins, and this is the first issue he did where he basically just spent one issue tying up all, forget about what went before, la 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 la. He done it very, very effectively so he could get on with what he wanted to do. And fair play to him, because if he was buying this book, and it was in the doldrums, by the way, I wasn't picking it up before Alan Moore. And like I said, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. It was only because I knew the name Alan Moore from, in previous episodes, if you remember, 2000 AD, Warrior specifically, really, for Alan Moore. And back in these days. And this would, throughout the 80s, once John Totalburn and Stephen Bissett got on board, I don't really think I need to go on anymore, because I think it's gone into comic book legend what he did with Swamp Thing. And anyway, I got Alan Moore to vandalise this copy. Yeah, here we go. I got him to vandalise this copy for me for no other reason than it was his first issue, and it wasn't his greatest achievement in this run. But by the time he got this, he signed this for me. I don't know how many, at one of the conventions or comic marts in London. There was, comic marts all over England in the 80s, just exploding. Leeds, Manchester. I can seem to remember specifically, but obviously I'm more London centric. So anyway, but because it was it was in the doldrums, like DC weren't really too interested, because yeah, if you save it, it's good for us. If it bombs, there you go. So anyway, Swamp Thing started off good with Bernie Wrightson back in the 70s, but I think when they resurrected it, it didn't quite. Leading on from Alan Moore, the only thing that attracted me to Swamp Thing, suddenly there are more names, and this is all direct market. So I'm in a comic shop, and if I hadn't picked up Comics International and read about this, or because there's no internet, there was no advertising for a lot of this. Oh yes, Brendan McCarthy, Milligan, McCarthy, and Ewins, Freakwave. Oh, come on. As a 2000, and still in the mid 80s, 2000 AD is still fresh as anything. It is still comic book rock and roll. 2000 AD, and they're still, and to see these artists let off the leash, particularly Brendan McCarthy, when he's let off the leash, I love his stuff. Not that there's much of a leash that he would ever work under, but you know what I mean. But leading on. Oh yeah, look, Strange Days. Brett Ewing's doing. I was going to say Finding Nemo then, and then I was going to say Captain Nemo instead of saying Johnny Nemo. Brett Ewing's, and they were all part of the same area from the same part of North London. Brett Ewins, Peter Milligan, and Brendan McCarthy, and here we go, Paradox. And this was just great. Like I say, this was just great stuff. All direct market. From there, so I'm drifting through, like I say, the marts, the comic shops, the conventions. This is another book that just Michael T. Gilbert, Mr. Monster. I don't know. This just attracted me, drew me in. I was there. Nice Dave Stevens cover. There was one book. There was one book in 1985. This one. I'm showing this now. I know I mentioned Marvel, and you're probably thinking, oh, why are you still banging on? Because this comic, this 5 or 6 issues, 4 issues. This book would redefine this character for decades. 1985. The violence, the madness, the over-the-top action and gore. This would, just that one image really sums it up. This is what the Punisher would, other than before this, he would just be a secondary character turning up, to wind up the main character, But no more white boots. Actually, did he have white boots in this? Don't think he did have. Anyway, from here, the white boots disappeared, which I love in the black and whites of the 70s, the black and white magazines where he kind of hailed from. And here we go, look, more direct market madness, Paradox. It was Milligan and McCarthy, I think, that done that. If not, it was, it is Milligan and McCarthy. I love this stuff, and it was the continuing British invasion up until 86, when we got that bad boy, Frank Miller, off of his Daredevil run. I don't know if he was still doing Daredevil in 1986. No, probably not. Now, this was a book that in graphic novel format, in later, when it obviously released, it was released in 86. This was the stuff that, you're square bound, quite expensive, but on glossy paper, no adverts. It just felt, at the time, it just felt different. It felt, so where DC had gone with Camelot 3000, no adverts, glossy, Baxter paper they called it, I think. Baxter grade, I don't know what. I don't know what Anchorman's dog has got to do with it, but anyway, it was named after. No, I'm only joking. But and the fight between him and Superman. It was something special. If you was there at the time, and I know if you're younger and you still love the story, I know. You're listening to an old man say, oh, I'm not saying you should have been there, because you couldn't, could you? But to be there at the time that all of this was happening, and looking back, it seemed like it all happened at once. It didn't. It was progressive. It was years. That mid-80s that I'm talking about is probably 82 to 86, 88 maybe. But it was exciting times. Now, I haven't got... When I bought the shops, when I had comic shops, so I've only got this to show you. This is the other one. These were the two I mentioned earlier. These were the two that were rocking everyone's world. And when they were released in these form, not particularly absolute format, but when they was released in trade paperback, graphic novels, whenever that word was coined, those words, that phrase, that's the word I'm looking for. When that phrase was coined, they got on the New York Times bestsellers list, and that elevated the medium. And I know there are a lot of cynics around now that say, did anything ever really progress from there? No, it all went down. It did a bit in the 90s. It did go downhill a bit. It did, didn't it? But we will get to that at a later date. But I still believe that those books they resonate. They still resonate, and they're still solid storytelling that each generation of comic book fans just has to have it. Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, and then you go on from there. Maybe real independent stuff like Mouse. Don't know why I suddenly thought of that one. But anyway, your little library of must-haves. They're all there, but I do prefer the more exciting stuff, I've got to say. I do lean towards the superhero stuff. And a couple of years later, he does it again. Alan Moore. Brian Bolland. British creators. I know Frank Miller isn't, but I'm just saying. Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons, Brian Bolland. Remember episode 1, 2000 AD? There they go. They're invading. And it's working. And again, square bound direct. I don't know how much. I can't tell you how important it was, how great it was to have this. It felt like comics were not just for kids anymore. You know, you're not getting. It's not when you say comic in England. If you said comics to people, they would say, "Oh, what you read, Beano and Dandy," and they would think you was like a man baby. Especially like when you're a teenager, you want to be cool and hip and ish. No, suddenly I read comics. Oh, have you read Killing Joke? Oh, you read Watchmen? Dark Knight Returns? Yeah. Frank Miller's Daredevil? No, maybe not. Oh, so you're the uncool one now. Maybe not. Maybe I'm misremembering that. I wouldn't have mentioned that to a girl in a nightclub. Don't get me wrong. Oh dear. Anyway, so this was good stuff. And before I get on to Epic, this for me was the culmination. In 1988, this come polybagged like the Marvel stuff does now, the sealed bag, but it was just, I think it was just a plain black bag. So you couldn't see anything, because that, not even in direct market comic shops, this was wrapped up tight. I'm tempted to say a condom for comics, but it would be fitting, wouldn't it, with a comic like this anyway. Howard Chaykin, who I'd fallen in love with from American Flag and Epic magazine, whose art also was in the first 6 issues of the Star Wars film adaptation, which he, to this day, I think, hates the fact that his name is attached to that. People remember his name from those 6 issues rather than, well, I think he's more proud of American Flag. I'm not saying he isn't proud of this, but 8 issues of naughtiness, smuttiness. But in '88, so I would have been 21. So yeah, there would be no questions about me buying. I don't know if this was on sale, in a comic shop, even direct market, to under 18s or whatever age you want to put to such content. And it was only a thin. It was only like, I don't know. I think that might have even not even gone 20 pages an issue. But again, it just felt like adult. All right, it's got TNA, but it just felt adult because of that. And they can do it. It's direct market and it's bagged. But the best thing about this period of comics is, without a doubt, the Epic imprint from Marvel. But before that, just 1 year before that, direct market, Cole the Conqueror, John Bolton cover, and John Bolton, another alumni of UK comics, and then he would provide the cover and interior art for this. And again, seeing his work on it was Warrior for me with John Bolton. I know he'd done some House of Hammer covers and stuff, you know, working with Des Skin. But for me, and then this bad boy comes along. Direct market, no adverts, Marvel's Epic imprint. So the magazine's out, and like I said in a previous episode, it's making me. The comics before that, you're becoming aware of the creators, but I think it was Epic that just broadened my horizons to other artists. You're just looking at, I don't know, Kalutas and Smiths and Veitch's. You're just looking at their stuff and thinking, wow, like how far can comics go? And Jim Starlin would have been a name that, oh, his Dreadstar stories, I forget what they were called now in Epic magazine. Metamorphosis Odyssey. How did I remember that? God knows what I remembered, how I remembered that. But to see the name like Starlin that would have been attached to Marvel characters of reprints I'd read, and you know, you're getting into back issues and stuff, and you know, you're kind of getting a feel for it. But to see him doing something different, creator owned, no adverts, glossy stock paper, marvellous. Next up from Epic, 6 from Sirius, Paul Gulacy, who had done the art for, whose name I would only have known on the Master of Kung Fu storylines. And he did do, I think he'd done a couple of, I think he might have done a couple of bits in Epic magazine. But Marvel knew what they were doing, because they were setting you, you know, Doug Moench on the writing, you know, a stalwart of Marvel. So you knew you're getting delivered. Not that I cared at the time, to be fair, I was after the artwork. But the stories have to be right, don't they? 6 from Sirius. 6 from Sirius was a good one. I got every issue of this from this first issue. Epic was awesome. Alien Legion, this was a great. This, and there was a strip in 2000 AD called The VCs. And then there was Rogue Trooper. Those future war stories, because of how I may be, because of my background in the UK, growing up with the Boys' Own Adventure war comics and strips and stories, maybe the appeal of future war was inbuilt. Maybe. Oh, more John Bolton. He excelled himself on this. Just one of those artists. Oh, Epic was, look at this stuff, look. And to me at the time, like these covers, like what John Bolton's doing here with real paint. To me, that was back in the top. I can remember thinking, like, these are proper artists. It's why I wanted to be a comic book artist. You know, stuff like this is real art. It's like the stuff you get on a sci-fi paperback cover. Real, like, proper art. Oh, beautiful stuff. John Bolton, beautiful artist. And then another artist who I was starting to fall in love with, Kaluta. And this was such a weird and wonderful, eclectic mashup of themes. Obviously science fiction, obviously set in the future. It really was. And I wouldn't read any Mobius until years later, and Jarofsky. But this was definitely in the same vein. You can tell that. You can tell this is in a mode, for me anyway. Looking back, I love this stuff, and I love his art style, Michael. But from there, it leads you back to all the work he did previously, and it's all thanks to Epic Illustrated, the magazine, introducing me to all these. Richard Corbin. I wouldn't have known Corbin. I weren't buying underground comics in the late 60s because I was only 3. So Epic Illustrated showing me Richard Corbin, then that's a name on your radar. And then you go into the shops, specialist shops, and you go into comic conventions, and oh, Richard Corbin, yeah, I'll give that a go, just based on the artwork. Beautiful stuff from Kaluta. And the other artist, although I'd seen his art on Conan, and I was collecting Conan, he came back to Marvel in the 80s. He had gone from Conan. I think he'd become disillusioned with the comic book industry, like a lot of them did. Went off and done a Gore Blimey press, so he was doing limited edition posters and stuff. And I have got a poster of it. I have got a print of this, actually, an art print of this, and one of the other covers he did for Epic Illustrated. This blew me away. To see Barry Windsor Smith's art, and like I mean, this is real fine art. And now I'm in the sixth form, and now there's a reference to pre-Raphaelites that Barry Windsor Smith gives. He gives a reference to the pre-Raphaelites. Now I'm researching pre-Raphaelites, and I want to go to art college. And it's all thanks to, I didn't get there, by the way. And it's all thanks to, that's another one of my all-time favourite artists. So you've got your Kaluta, you've got your Barry Windsor Smith, you've got your Corbin, and you've got P. Craig Russell. And doing Elric, that Elric one he did, these were inspirational to me. Oh, I don't know how you pronounce his name. Suidan. Arthur Suidan. Trolley and Flytrap. And they did a little separate series of this stuff. And again, he was in the vein of Frank Frazetta, a very visceral, organic kind of, you can tell that is in the vein of Frazetta. And again, Frazetta did the cover to issue 1 of Epic magazine. By the way, the only commissioned work by Marvel that Frazetta ever did, that one cover, which I find astonishing. But that was the one that was rocking my world. And it was a lot of British creators there. A lot. I know Barry Windsor Smith kind of moved over there in the late 60s, early 70s doing the superhero stuff, but nevertheless, he's a Brit. He's British. Your John Bolton, Alan Moore, Brian Bolland, Dave Gibbons, on and on and on. I was still loving it. In the middle of all that, I'm going to leave it there for this episode, because I think that's enough, don't you? I seem to ramble on. When I stack this stuff up, I look at it and I think, blimey, that won't last a quarter of an hour. I do tend to waffle a bit, only because I love this stuff. And like I say, I was there living it. So hopefully, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it for what it is. And it's only a personal journey. Next time up, Dark Horse arrives in the middle of this, really, but I had to kind of find a way to separate it a little bit. Not only Dark Horse, there are more. Late 80s, there is still lots more adventure to be had in the memoirs, and it still involves the other side of the tracks, not the big two. Even though the big two weren't bad, I'm not saying they were, because obviously DC were doing Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, and that list that I gave you earlier on, Marvel were doing all that. So it was oosh everywhere. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much if you've followed me this far. I really hope you've enjoyed that. I know it's personal. I know it feels a bit indulgent, but sometimes, sharing your memories, where you were, what you were doing with your mates, like I say, got a few quid to spend because you've got a couple of part-time jobs. What'd you do? Waste it on records, magazine. Before girls arrive, you're wasting it on comics, vinyl, and magazines and posters. That's all I have to say about that. And until next time, I'm going to bid you all adios.